So the first thing you'll do is you'll click on images, and then you'll go to parts, print layout, and slicer settings index, and then you'll just go through like page 1, page 2. You'll just open the image files to see exactly how each part is laid out, and it'll have little notes about the slicer settings. So like this is how, like if you're looking down at the print bed, this is how each part should be laid out. So this is like what the gun body should look like when you're finished cleaning it. It's very handy to have a thin file for cleaning out this little slot here. Alright, so before we attach the shoulders to the gun body, we just want to dry fit your pieces first. Make sure everything's actually going to fit before you go and cover everything in glue. Try to cover as much surface area here as possible. You also want to have like a couple coins ready or something to shim the space in between. You'll see why in a second here. Get that in, slip those in, and then what those do is when you push down on this, you want to be pushing down and in. Pushing it down into place and also in to the gun body. The reason we put the coins here is so that when we're pressing down on this top part here, it'll also push down on this bottom part. So now we're gonna insert our doweling, drop some glue in, insert the dowel. If I need to, I'll use pliers. Alright, so now we're just gonna build the inner chamber here. But before we can build this and test it, we need to have one of these. The way you make these bolts is once you have it all cleaned up, you just need to cut a nail tip to about 40 millimeters length. The diameter of this is about 2.8. You want to make it so it doesn't come out. You just put some bite marks into it with a pair of side cutters or whatever. And I'll put the bolt in. And this is very tight. Usually you have to like push it against something to get it in. Just like that. So to do the slim bolt, you'll basically repeat the same process as on the last one, but instead of using the same size nail, you'll be using a nail that's like 1.5 millimeters, 1.6, somewhere around there. And then once you have your soldering iron heated up, what you want to do is you want to weld the piece of fletching on, but you don't want to run it down the crack because it won't weld anything. You want to kind of push the weld off the shaft onto the bolt in just like random spots. Just kind of tack it along. Kind of like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. It should look something like this afterward. Alright, so once you get that made, you can start building the chamber. These are super thin dowels. There's that. I just need the trigger and the trigger axle. Oh, first put the auto clip. This is the feature that actually catches the bolt when you drop it in. Put in the trigger axle. The trigger goes in here. Sit down over that. Alright, and you should be able to test it basically if you just keep your pinky on the trigger spring there, and then just drop a bolt in and see if it stays. Oh yeah, it works. And then when you let go, it should drop up. Just like that. Just want to double check this, make sure that this region here is really well cleaned, that you don't have any extra material in here throwing out your dimensions, because it's very tight space in here. So I'll make sure that we get the trigger guard on there. Okay. Put this on. Gun tip. Shoulder joint on. We'll put it's not the right dovetail. Put this bow tie on. And now we're going to make this stronger. More interlocked. So I'm going to put this Picatinny rail on. It's not a real Picatinny rail, it just looks like one. God damn it. Gotta be fucking getting me. Let's see why. Oh my god, why? Why is it tight? It's not supposed to be that tight. Try a little more persuasion here. Alright, now I'm just going to bolt up these pre-drills. This bolt connection here can sometimes be a pain because there's no hex fitting on the other side, and the bridge is too long to fit a washer. So you could just have like another screwdriver holding the nut in place while you screw it in. And if you ever need to unscrew it, you can just stick a small flathead in the side here so that the nut doesn't spin when you unscrew it. So this is the stubby tool. On the bottom here it's got this little spring, and you want to make sure it's situated this way. You want the spring to be pointing forward so that you slide this piece on, it doesn't snag. And what that spring does is it just prevents the stubby from like shaking around inside, sounding cheap or like something's broken, like this front sight. Goes like this. That's how that goes. And that goes in here. So the thing to take note of when you're making the tuning module is it has a very low tolerance because the worm drive components are so small. So basically they need to fit perfectly. They need to be tight enough that they can't move or wobble at all, but not so tight that they can't turn, obviously. So it's better to have them, rough, like operating roughly and, hard, barely able to turn than it is to turn easily. Because if they're turning without friction, then there's too much play. Like this. And close this. This tool is for. So you open this compartment, get your little stubby, and then you can adjust the tuning peg. If it's working well, should be able to turn this. Yeah, that looks like it's working pretty well. And it'll get smoother over time on its own, so don't bother trying to make it smooth because then you'll just make it too loose. Alright, so for this next part, you're going to want to heat up a soldering iron with a crappy tip for just melting plastic with. And we're going to reinforce these worm gears with pieces of filament. So basically, the way these are printed, with all of the tension that's going to be acting on them, the tops could be ripped off, right? So we need to cross grain this part, and the best way to do that with the limited amount of space we have is to have multiple filament strands going vertically. So these holes should fit pretty tight. Probably need pliers to stuff it in. I'm just gonna fill them all and cut them basically flush. Now we're basically just gonna kind of like surface weld this. What that's gonna do is it's just gonna kind of fuse the strands of filament to the top layers. And these need to have that reinforcement because they're gonna have, up to 15 pounds of force acting against them. Just like that. You don't want to make it too deep because then you won't get adhesion to the topmost layers. It's like you'll sink past them too much. So just like this is fine. There you go, it should look like that. Alright, and now that all that's done, we can finally tie in the bottom. And for that we have three options. We got so dovetail cap. That'll basically just turn this into like the standard basic model with no upgrades. And then there's the bottom mount coupler in plain, and then there's also the same thing but embossed. So I'm gonna go with the embossed one because it's cool. And then it just slides on like this. Alright, looks like we're getting close to the finish line for phase 1. Cam. There's a left and right axle for these, so basically you want like that curve to be on the outside. I don't even know if you can see that, but this is the left one. It's a very subtle detail. It's very subtle. You want your cam to spin pretty free. You want it to be like a bearing. I think I need to drill out these cams a bit. It's not spinning. Well, that one's okay. I'll still do it anyway. Just drill out a tiny little bit. I forgot to hit record when I was making the composite limb, but this is how you make it. So have as many small clamps ready to go as possible. And then you'll take your JB Super Weld and you'll just quickly hit the back of this thing, you know, like pretty, you want to get it pretty thorough, but not, you don't want to have so much on that it's like oozing out the sides and making your limb look ugly. And then you'll want to clamp it very thoroughly so you have something like this going on. And if you're very meticulous about the process, you'll get a perfect result. I've shot this like a bunch of times. This is just regular PLA. I've fired it like well over 50 times and you don't see a single stretch mark on the outside here. But on this side there's one little spot where I didn't clamp it super well and you can see a little stretch mark. Those little white lines, that's a stretch mark. That's the sign of failure. And the reason it has that is because there's just one tiny little spot that I didn't clamp down quite well enough. If my camera would focus, you can see it right there. Just a little bit of a gap there. So the reason this works, the reason why this makes it so much stronger is because this thin material is very flexible. It can bend a lot further than this limb spring can. But PLA actually has very good compression flexibility. So by printing both parts at certain geometries in a certain way and then bonding them together, we are able to like maximize both types of flexibility. And by using like a hexagonal shaped infill pattern, we can maximize compression flexibility that way too. And you can also make your outer wall thicknesses less. Another thing you can do to reduce risk of failure is use silk PLA or PETG, as these filaments are more flexible and so they'll produce a stronger limb spring, but not necessarily as powerful. This stuff is, let's say, I don't know, 4,500 pounds per square inch capacity. So my advice is don't glue yourself to yourself, because that's one call you don't want to make. There's a left and a right screw. So one of them is forward thread, the other one's reverse thread. So if you're trying to screw it in, try both ways first. See, this one's the reverse thread one. And so this fits any standard sized drill bit. There she is, fucking beaut. Alright, now to string the crossbow. We want to cut one string at about 390. So I'll leave a little bit extra because we're going to singe the ends. Cut another 2 pieces for the cams, for the idle pulleys, about 145 or so. And this particular cord I'm using is called tactical cord. It's different than paracord. It's got like, it has nylon strands inside, and then it has like a paracord sleeve around it, I think. But I went with this one. I mean, actual bowstring would be better, but I was just buying string from a department store at the time, so I found the tactical cord was the least stretchy of the thicker kinds, and the thickness of this is about 2.4, let's say 2.3, somewhere around there. So you want to pick something that's no smaller and not much bigger, if at all. Because if you go with something smaller, then it's very likely to snag inside the enclosure. And the problem with tactical cord is because it's got separate strands, you need to make sure that you singe the ends, like you fuse them together well when you singe the ends. Otherwise they can decouple and it can become loose and melted together. Yeah, something like that. Once you've got all that done, we also want to make a proper serving on this thing to prevent snags and such. Then what you do is you find the center of your drawstring. So yeah, once you got that secured somehow, I'm just going to dump some CA glue on it. What that's going to do is it's just going to harden the rope in that one area so that it's like more like a bar instead of a string. It'll prevent it from like bending and snagging and getting caught on the bolt or whatever. Just wipe off some of the excess. And just leave it like that for 20 minutes or whatever. It'll take a while to cure because this stuff's supposed to be clamped, but it'll harden. Before you string your cams, you're going to want to check the tracks very closely for burrs. Like you can actually kind of already see one there. Little sharp burr there. You could see stringing from the prints. Like cams are notorious for having these kinds of imperfections, and they catch on the string and it's really bad. So sure to get those nice and smooth and deburred before you put string anywhere near them. So one of the things that makes this crossbow unique is the way the string connects. So normally you like loop around a corner and then you have a loop that goes around a peg, but I was finding that tying loops was just taking up too much space. So I came up with these singed end ports where, like, you know, the singed end goes right there, right, and then you just kind of tuck the rest in. There we go. Once your drawstring's finished curing, you should have something like this. Yeah, very stiff. So normally the way you do that is you tie a serving. It's like you get a special thread and you have to tie this crazy knot. But I discovered yet another ingenious way to do archery things without having to learn archery things. So once that's good, I like to hit the middle part with some dry silicone. Nice and slippery. And here's a closer look at the cam's stringing. So basically you have the drawstring that just goes around the top here, and then it loops around into that little port up there, and then the tuning pegs connect to the idle pulley on the bottom. It comes, around from under this way and goes around and then connects into that port there. So for the rope stop feature, these print in a compressed state. So what you'll have to do is score them with an X-Acto knife to activate them. And then you just kind of pull them apart, just stretch them out. And then to attach them, they just press fit into the little cavity like so. Just like that. Also, if you're wondering how I did the different colored lettering, this is just cheap acrylic paint that I picked up at the dollar store and then clear coated with varnish a couple times. And remember, don't shoot yourself in the eye.